The small town of Hollowbrook always prided itself on being a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's name, where children played in the streets without a care in the world, and neighbors gathered for weekend barbecues. It was a peaceful haven, cut off from the chaotic pace of the outside world. But that peace was shattered on a sweltering summer morning in August, when the body of 18-year-old Dylan Rivers was found brutally murdered in his family's modest home. Dylan was well known and loved in Hollowbrook. He was a senior at North Hollowbrook High, and though he wasn't the most academically gifted, he had a talent for fixing things, particularly cars. His love for auto mechanics began when he was just a kid, working alongside his late father in their small garage. Dylan's friends would often see him working on an old Mustang he was restoring in the driveway, his hands perpetually covered in grease. His dream was to open his own auto repair shop someday, and despite the challenges life threw his way, Dylan remained optimistic. Dylan lived with his grandmother, Erin Rivers, who had gone blind years ago. She depended on Dylan for nearly everything. Despite his youth, Dylan handled the responsibility with remarkable maturity. He juggled school, a part-time job at Brody's auto shop, and caring for his grandmother without a single complaint. To the residents of Hollowbrook, Dylan was a golden boy, the type who'd go out of his way to help a neighbor in need. Dylan's life seemed perfect to those on the outside. He had been dating Megan Price, an equally bright and driven young woman, for the past 2 years. Megan was ambitious, with dreams of leaving Hollowbrook behind to attend college and make a name for herself. Together, they were the couple everyone in town admired, their relationship a beacon of young love. They talked about getting married, starting a family, and building a future together. But Dylan harbored a dark secret, one that weighed heavier on him with each passing day. For the past year, he had been involved in an affair with Megan's mother, Rachel Price, a 44-year-old woman known for her beauty and her somewhat scandalous reputation in town. Rachel was married to Victor Price, a stern but successful businessman who spent more time away from home than with his family. The Price family lived in a grand house on Sycamore Hill, where Rachel often entertained the wealthy elite of Hollowbrook. Rachel had always had an air of mystery about her. She was fiercely independent, running a small boutique in town called Silk Ivy, where she sold high-end fashion to the town's wealthier residents. She was known for her sharp wit, her unapologetic personality, and her complicated relationship with her daughter Megan. Their rivalry was no secret. Rachel, still youthful and striking, often vied for attention in ways that made Megan feel small and inadequate. What began as innocent flirtation between Dylan and Rachel turned into a full-fledged affair that spiraled out of control. Rachel, desperate to cling to her youth and the thrill of being desired, became obsessed with Dylan. For Dylan, the affair was a mistake he couldn't seem to escape. He loved Megan, but Rachel's hold on him was intoxicating, and breaking free felt impossible. Dylan's once simple life was now tangled in a web of lies that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. On the morning of August 14th, the scorching summer heat blanketed Hollowbrook in a suffocating stillness. Inside the Rivers' home, Evelyn, blind and frail, sat in her favorite armchair, waiting for Dylan to bring her breakfast as he always did. But that morning there was no sound of him moving around the house, no clattering of plates, no humming of the radio. Evelyn called out his name, but the house remained eerily silent. Her heart filled with dread. Something was wrong. Evelyn managed to call her neighbor, Helen O'Connor, a retired schoolteacher who had lived next door for as long as anyone could remember. Helen hurried over, letting herself into the house with the spare key Dylan had given her. She called out, her voice echoing in the empty hallway, but there was no response. As she walked toward Dylan's room, she noticed the strange metallic scent in the air, a smell she had only ever encountered once before, during her years teaching biology at the high school. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened the door to Dylan's bedroom. The scene before her was something out of a nightmare. Dylan lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood surrounding him. His face was pale, his eyes wide open but devoid of life. He had been stabbed multiple times, and his body bore the signs of a struggle. The knife used in the attack lay discarded beside him, still stained with his blood. Helen froze, her heart pounding in her chest as she fumbled for her phone. With trembling hands, she called 911, barely able to speak as she reported the murder. Within minutes, the once quiet neighborhood of Hollowbrook was swarming with police cars and ambulances. Neighbors gathered on their front lawns, whispering in disbelief as the flashing lights illuminated the otherwise peaceful street. Detective Marcus Hale arrived at the scene, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had been with the Hollowbrook Police Department for over 20 years, and though the town rarely saw crimes of this magnitude, Hale was known for his methodical approach and unyielding dedication to justice. He had seen his fair share of tragedies over the years, but something about this case felt different, more personal. Hale's partner, Detective Erin Dempsey, was younger and known for her sharp intuition. Together, they surveyed the gruesome crime scene that had turned the Rivers home into a horror show. The attack on Dylan had been brutal. His body lay crumpled on the floor, deep stab wounds marring his chest and abdomen. Blood spattered the walls and furniture, painting a chaotic picture of a violent struggle. The sheer ferocity of the crime suggested that this was no random act of violence. Hale could feel it in his gut. This was personal. As Dempsey photographed the scene and collected evidence, Hale's mind raced. Dylan's murder had shattered the peace of Hollowbrook, and he knew that whoever had done this had been driven by powerful emotions. The key to solving this case lay in understanding those emotions and the tangled relationships that had led to this violent end. Outside, the neighbors had gathered, watching in stunned silence as police officers moved in and out of the house. The once close-knit community was now a hive of rumors and suspicion. As Hale and Dempsey began their investigation, they knew that in a town like Hollowbrook, secrets never stayed buried for long. The first person the detectives wanted to speak to was Megan Price, Dylan's girlfriend. They found her sitting on the front porch of her family's grand home on Sycamore Hill, her face pale and tear-streaked. Megan had been devastated by the news of Dylan's death, and the shock of it all had left her numb. Dempsey approached her gently, sitting beside her on the porch steps as Hale stood nearby, watching for any signs that Megan might know more than she was letting on. Through sobs, Megan recounted her relationship with Dylan. They had been dating for 2 years, and though they had their ups and downs, Megan had always believed they would be together forever. They had plans to leave Hollowbrook after graduation, plans to build a life together. But now, all of that was gone, ripped away in an instant. When Dempsey asked if anything had been troubling Dylan lately, Megan hesitated. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. After a long pause, she revealed that she had discovered something just days before Dylan's death, something that had shattered her world. Megan had found explicit text messages between Dylan and her mother, Rachel. The messages left no room for doubt. Dylan had been having an affair with her mother. The revelation had led to a massive argument between Megan and Rachel. Megan had confronted her mother, demanding answers, but Rachel had been dismissive, acting as if it were no big deal. Megan had been heartbroken, and though she loved Dylan, she wasn't sure how to move forward. She hadn't told anyone else about the affair, not even Dylan. Now, he was gone, and Megan was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Next on the list was Rachel Price. Hale and Dempsey found her at her boutique, Silk Ivy, pretending to carry on with business as usual, though the strain of the situation was evident on her face. Rachel was a beautiful woman with a carefully crafted image of perfection that she presented to the world. But Hale had seen enough in his years on the force to recognize the cracks in her facade. When questioned about her relationship with Dylan, Rachel downplayed their connection, referring to him only as her daughter's boyfriend. She insisted that their interactions had been casual, nothing more than friendly conversation. But Hale wasn't buying it. There was something in the way Rachel spoke, something in the way she avoided eye contact, that told him there was more to the story. As the detectives pressed her about the affair, Rachel's polished demeanor began to crumble. At first, she denied everything, but when they confronted her with the text messages Megan had found, Rachel broke down. Through tears, she confessed to the affair, describing it as a mistake and claiming that she had never meant for it to go as far as it had. She had been lonely, she explained, and Dylan had been kind to her. One thing had led to another. But Rachel swore that she had nothing to do with his death. "I would never hurt him," she sobbed. "I loved him." Despite her emotional outburst, Hale remained unconvinced. Rachel's obsession with Dylan, her jealousy of her daughter, and the timing of Dylan's murder painted a disturbing picture. But there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. The detectives also interviewed Victor Price, Rachel's husband and Megan's father. Victor was a man who valued appearances above all else. As a successful businessman, he had built a reputation in Hollowbrook for being tough and driven. But his marriage to Rachel had long been on shaky ground, and he had chosen to ignore the warning signs rather than confront the issues head-on. When asked about his relationship with Rachel and Dylan, Victor was stoic. He claimed that he had no idea about the affair until after Dylan's death. He admitted that his marriage to Rachel had been strained for years, but he had never imagined she would betray him like this. Victor's alibi for the night of the murder was solid. He had been away on business, with several colleagues able to vouch for his whereabouts. Still, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that Victor knew more than he was letting on. As the investigation continued, the detectives dug deeper into Dylan's life, uncovering more secrets and lies than they had anticipated. Dylan's friends mentioned that he had been acting strange in the weeks leading up to his death, nervous, distracted. He had confided in one friend that he wanted to break things off with Rachel, but he didn't know how. He loved Megan, but he felt trapped in the affair with her mother. Hale and Dempsey also learned that Rachel had become increasingly possessive of Dylan in the months leading up to his murder. She had started showing up at his workplace unannounced, calling him constantly, and even making veiled threats when he tried to distance himself from her. It was clear that Rachel's obsession had escalated, and the detectives began to suspect that when Dylan tried to end the affair, Rachel had snapped. The turning point in the investigation came when an anonymous tip led the detectives to a key piece of evidence: security footage from a gas station near the Rivers home. The footage showed Rachel's car driving toward Dylan's house late on the night of his murder. Though it wasn't conclusive proof of her guilt, it was enough to warrant further investigation. Armed with this new evidence, Hale and Dempsey returned to question Rachel once more. This time she was less composed. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear that Rachel was beginning to crack under the weight of her lies. Finally, on the morning of August 21st, after weeks of investigation, the truth came to light. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including the security footage and testimony from witnesses who had seen her near Dylan's house that night, Rachel confessed to the murder. She had gone to Dylan's house that night to confront him, desperate to keep him from leaving her. When Dylan tried to end the affair for good, Rachel lost control. In a fit of rage, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed him repeatedly. After the murder, she had tried to cover her tracks, but her obsession with Dylan and her need for control ultimately led to her downfall. Rachel Price was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial that followed was the talk of Hollowbrook, with reporters and townspeople alike eager for every new detail. Rachel's defense team argued that she had acted in a moment of emotional instability, But the jury was not swayed. The evidence against her was too damning, and Rachel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Megan, the aftermath of the trial was a time of deep sorrow and confusion. She had lost not only the boy she loved, but also the mother she had grown up idolizing, only to discover the darkest side of her. Megan left Hollowbrook shortly after the trial, seeking to escape the memories that haunted her. But the scars from that summer would stay with her forever, a painful reminder of the betrayal and loss that had shattered her world. As for the town of Hollowbrook, it would never quite be the same. The once peaceful community had been forever tainted by the crime that had unfolded in its midst. Dylan's murder became a cautionary tale, a whispered story passed down among the townspeople, a reminder that even in the most idyllic of places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface.